Chapter 14. The Bark That Bled Black. When bark splits without a blade, ask what it tried to hold. Carved into a hollow limb, now buried in ash, I moved not with intent, but with an awareness so deeply tuned to the ground that I ceased to think of walking as my own action. My steps unfolded like verses in a language the earth had always spoken. The forest allowed this traversal no resistance, no invitation, only acknowledgement. Each footfall tapped a memory embedded in root and stone, and the moss beneath me seemed to shift its texture and subtle alignment, like a breath drawn through time. A mist clung to the air with tenacity, refusing to lift as it should. It hovered, not by accident, but with a kind of grieving will. It diffused the sunlight into long, wavering threads, each one brushing against bark, leaf, and skin, as if translating the story of light into tactile feeling. Trees glistened as though the dew upon them bore purpose. The moss stretched upward in places, drying slower than it should, like it did not wish to release what the night had given. The silence was not empty, but crowded with attention, filled with unseen observation. Behind me, the forest changed. Not abruptly, but where it once bent left, it now arched subtly to the right. Behind me, the forest changed. Not abruptly, but where a tree once bent left, it now arched subtly to the right. Branches repositioned themselves as if renegotiating their own memories. It was not a trick of perception. The land remembered me, not just my presence, but my orientation, my intention, my intent. I had entered not merely a space, but a system of living memory, where my motion was a stimulus and the forest a responsive mind. The leaf I carried had curled further. Still, I had not touched it with bare skin, but it had entered my thoughts so thoroughly that I no longer dreamed without its pattern. Spirals invaded everything: the water's eddies, the twist of new roots breaking ground, the flights of tiny insects looping like airborne script. The spiral now guided me, not as symbol, but as law. Even my breath mimicked it, in and out, expanding, collapsing, circling, always returning. Then came the anomaly, a sound with no clear source, a vibration that shimmered against my skin, not from air, but from matter. I turned not with will, but with recognition. A narrowing path pulled at me, and the trees responded to my shift. They parted not in deference, but in precision, guiding me with purpose. Ahead, a single tree waited atop a rise. It was not larger nor older, but it possessed gravity. Its bark was smooth, unnaturally so, like polished thought. At its core, a fissure ran down, black resin leaking from the wound, not dripping, but descending, thick, slow, irrevocable. The wound read like history carved in flesh. The resin absorbed light instead of reflecting it, drinking it as sorrow drinks memory. I stood at the edge of the clearing, unready. The space vibrated with latency, not in threat, but in demand. I waited until I felt accepted. Then I entered. The clearing did not welcome. It confessed. I was inside a thought too large to articulate. The tree, silent, bore witness to something I could not name. When I reached for the resin, it was not decision, it was surrender. My fingers met bark, not as contact, but as invocation. The forest did not move, but I did, within. I saw the roots push back against collapse. Stone contoured around saplings. Fire, caught beneath, flared in silence. A rebellion against ruin. The tree bled not from harm, but from preservation. It had opened to remember. Not itself, but something older. When I withdrew, the resin trailed from my hand in a line too thin to break. It clung not as glue, but as story. My skin pulsed. The ground beneath me trembled, not shaken, but shivered. I pressed my hand to the soil. A new thread had entered it. That night, I could not sleep. My dreams cracked. Where spirals had once calmed me, now fractures spread. A voice arrived not in sound, but in placement. It settled beneath language. It folded itself between breath and thought, not to be spoken, only to be born. The tree had chosen to bleed, not to release pain, but to ensure memory. And now, I carried it. The next morning, the forest felt closer. The trees paused as I neared them, not in fear, not in greeting, in consideration. Even the stone, when I turned it in my hand, felt altered. Its weight had not changed, but something had, as if what I had touched, it now knew as well. Some burdens are not shared to lighten them. They are shared to survive them. I could not clean the resin fully. I tried water, leaves, earth, but it left behind. A scent I could not name, a slight vibration in my bones. Even words began to resist me. I would think to say something, and the forest would seem to whisper it first, not aloud, but with presence. When I touched other trees, I felt hesitation, not rejection, not welcome, like a question. And I had no answer. The bark that bled black had given me something I didn't know how to hold, then perhaps taken something too. I walked slower now, not because I feared, but because the island was watching, not idly, but carefully. And somewhere deep inside, the memory pulsed. Still wet, still writing. It continued even in silence. The resin hardening on tips hummed with inaudible rhythm. My breath shortened not from fatigue, but reverence. I began to notice patterns in the soil, etched grooves like veins beneath skin, each one pointing outward from the clearing. The forest was not just alive, it was a story system, and I had become part of its flow. Birdsong ceased. Insects withdrew, not out of fear, but to allow something else to be heard. A tone beneath sound, a resonance beneath structure. I could feel it beneath my ribs. The forest's attention no longer merely followed me, it conversed, inscribed its intent against mine. My fingers, stained and stubbornly marked, tingled with each step. The bark of nearby trees seemed smoother. Younger trees bent ever so slightly toward me. Insects landed and did not flee. Leaves fluttered above without wind. I did not command any of it. I simply existed within its cadence. When I crouched to drink from a stream, the water held my reflection longer than it should have. It shimmered, fractured, then returned not quite my face, but something close. As if the island had begun redrawing me not in defiance, but in memory's image. Sleep returned on the third night, but it was not rest. It was rehearsal. The same grove, the same tree, the bleeding bark now open like an eye. Inside it, layers of image and rhythm, roots weaving stories, creatures speaking without breath, and at the center, a hollow pulsing with intent. And when I woke, my hand pressed to earth again. The resin had faded, but its memory had not. Even my silence had started to echo.